In the entire history of the United States military, there is one battle that Americans still struggle to talk about honestly. One battle where the most powerful army on earth went up against a man they had dismissed, underestimated, and tried to destroy, and lost completely. That battle was the Little Bighorn. June 25th, 1876. And the man who made it happen, the man who saw it coming before any soldier raised a rifle, was Sitting Bull. This is not just the story of a warrior. This is the story of the most extraordinary leader Native America ever produced. A man of such profound spiritual depth and such complete personal courage that even his enemies could not stop writing about him decades after his death. A man who never stopped fighting for his people, even when fighting meant sacrifice that most human beings could not endure. And a man who was murdered in his own home by the very government that feared him enough to send 43 armed officers to his door before dawn. Sitting Bull was born around 1831 on the Great Plains, the vast open land of what is now South Dakota. His people were the Hunkpapa Lakota, one of the 7 nations of the Great Sioux Confederation. He was born into a world where the Lakota were among the most powerful peoples on the continent. They rode the plains freely. They followed the buffalo. They governed themselves through a complex and sophisticated system of counsel and consent that outsiders almost never took the time to understand. His name at birth was not Sitting Bull. He was given the name Jumping Badger. But even as a young boy, something distinguished him from other children. He was not the fastest or the most physically imposing. What he had was something rarer, the ability to be completely still in his mind when everyone around him was in motion, the ability to see further ahead than others, the ability to understand a situation in its totality before deciding how to respond. His father recognized this quality and gave him a new name, Tatanka Iyotake, Sitting Bull, a name that captured both the immovable strength of a buffalo bull and the quality of deliberate stillness that defined his character throughout his life. By the time he was a young man, Sitting Bull had distinguished himself in battle, counting coup against enemy warriors and proving his courage by the standards his culture valued most. But he was never purely a warrior in the narrow sense. He was simultaneously a healer, a poet, a singer, a father of deep tenderness, and a spiritual leader of such recognized power that his own people came to regard him as something rare, a man who carried the wakan, the sacred, more fully than other men. The world Sitting Bull was born into began to change dramatically in the 1860s. The United States government had been expanding westward for decades, pushing native nations off their lands through a combination of military force and treaties that were broken almost as quickly as they were signed. By 1868, the government signed the Fort Laramie Treaty with the Lakota, formally recognizing the Black Hills of South Dakota as Lakota land in perpetuity. Sacred land, Pahasapa, the heart of everything that is. The treaty lasted exactly 6 years. In 1874, General George Armstrong Custer led an expedition into the Black Hills and found gold. What followed was not a negotiation or a renegotiation of the treaty. It was an invasion. Thousands of miners flooded into Lakota territory. The United States government, rather than honoring its own legal agreement, offered to buy the Black Hills for $6 million. The Lakota refused. The land was not for sale. It had never been for sale. The government's response to this refusal was to declare that all Lakota who had not moved onto reservations by January 31st, 1876, would be considered hostile and subject to military force. January 31st was in the middle of a Great Plains winter. Temperatures regularly dropped to 40 below zero. The government knew that most Lakota bands could not travel through those conditions. The deadline was not a genuine offer. It was the pretext for a war the government had already decided to fight. Sitting Bull understood this completely. He called a gathering, the largest gathering of Native American peoples in the history of the continent. The Lakota, the Northern Cheyenne, the Arapaho. Together they came to the valley of the Little Bighorn River in Montana. Perhaps 10,000 people, 3,000 warriors. The largest concentration of indigenous fighting force ever assembled in North America. And then, Sitting Bull did something that military historians still study today. He did not simply prepare for battle. He prayed. He conducted a sun dance, the most sacred of Lakota ceremonies, in which he sacrificed pieces of his own flesh and danced for hours until a vision came. In that vision, he saw soldiers falling from the sky into the Lakota camp like grasshoppers, falling upside down, which in Lakota spiritual understanding meant falling in defeat. The soldiers would come, and they would be defeated.
June 25, 1876. Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, the same man who had led the illegal expedition into the Black Hills, approached the enormous Lakota and Cheyenne encampment with approximately 700 men divided into 3 columns. Custer made a decision that military analysts still argue about today. He divided his forces and attacked immediately, without waiting for the other columns of the army to be in position. He was confident. He had fought Native peoples before and won. He believed the camp would scatter at the first sign of soldiers. It did not scatter. What met Custer's 210 men on that hillside was something no American military force had encountered before. A fully mobilized force of warriors led by men of extraordinary tactical skill, including Crazy Horse, who executed a flanking maneuver of such military precision that West Point instructors later used it as a teaching example. In less than an hour, every single one of Custer's men was dead. The United States Army suffered its most complete and catastrophic defeat in the history of the Plains Indian Wars. Not a single man in Custer's immediate command survived. Sitting Bull had not fought in the battle himself. His role had been what it always was: spiritual leadership, vision, and the creation of the conditions in which others could act. He had seen it coming. He had told his people it was coming, and it came exactly as he had described. The victory at Little Bighorn did not bring freedom. It brought the full weight of the United States Army down on the Lakota, with a fury that even Sitting Bull had not fully anticipated. More soldiers came, then more. The buffalo, the foundation of Lakota life, were being systematically slaughtered by hunters and government policy simultaneously. The great herds that had once darkened the plains for miles were being eliminated. Without the buffalo, the Lakota could not survive on the open plains. In 1877, Sitting Bull led his people across the border into Canada, refusing to surrender, refusing to sign away what remained of Lakota territory. He stayed in Canada for 4 years. The Canadian government treated him with more respect than the American government had. But Canada could not sustain the Lakota indefinitely. The buffalo were disappearing there too. His people were hungry. Children were going without food. In 1881, Sitting Bull led his people back across the border and surrendered at Fort Buford in North Dakota. He surrendered, not because he had been defeated. He surrendered because his people needed to eat. The distinction matters enormously. He was never conquered. He chose to return under terms that allowed his people to survive. What followed was 2 years of imprisonment. The United States government held Sitting Bull as a prisoner of war at Fort Randall, despite having given assurances that he would be treated as a surrendered combatant rather than a prisoner. His captors were afraid of him. Even in defeat, he commanded a presence and an authority that the men holding him found uncomfortable and threatening.
In 1885, Sitting Bull joined Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, not because he had been broken or because he celebrated what his life had become. He joined because it paid him $50 a week, which he used to feed the hungry children who gathered around the show's camps in every city. He spent the money he earned performing a caricature of himself for white audiences on feeding children who had nothing. He gave away almost everything he earned. He hated the show. He hated what it asked of him. He returned to the Standing Rock Reservation after 1 season and never went back. He told friends that he could not understand white society's relationship to poverty. He could not understand a world where some people had so much while children nearby had nothing. And nobody acted as if this was a problem to be solved. He spent his final years at Standing Rock, still a spiritual leader, still a figure of enormous authority among his people, still a man the United States government watched with deep and fearful attention. In 1889, the government forced the breakup of the Great Sioux Reservation into smaller, separate reservations, taking 9 million acres of Lakota land in a single act. Sitting Bull opposed this publicly. He traveled between Lakota communities, encouraging people not to sign agreements they had not fully understood, and not to accept terms that would further diminish what little remained. This opposition was enough to make him a target. In 1890, the Ghost Dance movement spread through Native American communities across the plains. It was a spiritual movement, a ceremony of prayer and hope that prophesied the return of the buffalo and the ancestors and the restoration of native life. The United States government saw it as a threat. They saw any gathering of native peoples for any purpose, including prayer, as potentially dangerous. They decided to arrest the leaders of the Ghost Dance movement. Sitting Bull was at the top of the list. At 5:30 in the morning, on December 15, 1890, 43 Lakota police officers, working for the United States government and backed by American cavalry troops, surrounded Sitting Bull's cabin at Standing Rock. They had been sent to arrest him. What followed was a confrontation in which Sitting Bull was shot twice, once in the chest and once in the head. He died at the scene. He was approximately 59 years old. The official account said his own people shot him, the Lakota police officers. The circumstances of exactly what happened in those early morning minutes remain disputed by historians. What is not disputed is that the United States government sent armed men to his home before dawn to remove him because he was speaking to his people about their rights and encouraging them not to be afraid. 2 weeks after Sitting Bull's death, the massacre at Wounded Knee occurred, in which 300 Lakota men, women, and children were killed by the United States Army. The two events are inseparable. The murder of Sitting Bull and the massacre at Wounded Knee were the final acts of a campaign to destroy Lakota resistance that had been ongoing for decades. Sitting Bull never stopped being who he was. Not when Custer came, not when the buffalo disappeared, not when he was imprisoned, not when he performed in the Wild West show, not when the government took 9 million more acres, not at 5:30 in the morning when they came to his door. He said once, and these words have been quoted and remembered for 130 years, "Let us put our minds together and see what life we can make for our children." Put our minds together, not our weapons, not our anger, our minds, our wisdom, our shared understanding of what matters most, and make life, specifically for children, not for governments or armies or abstract ideals, but for the children who would have to live in whatever world was left. That was Sitting Bull, a man whose entire life was an argument for the proposition that the most powerful thing any human being can do is know who they are and refuse to become anything else, regardless of what it costs them. The United States government spent decades trying to make Sitting Bull into something other than what he was. They failed completely. He died exactly as he had lived, on his land, among his people, speaking his truth at whatever cost. If this story moved you, if Sitting Bull's life reached something real inside you, please hit like right now. This story deserves to be known by every person who has ever believed that standing for something is worth the cost. Subscribe to this channel because every week we tell the full, honest story of Native American history. The real version, not the textbook version. Share this with someone who thinks they know this story already. I promise you, there is something in this video they have never heard before. Comment below. What is the one thing about Sitting Bull that surprised you most today? I read every single comment. Until next time, put our minds together and walk in honor.